Okay, so what have we been doing in chapter 4? Good. Quadratic equations, factoring, graphing, solving. In 4.5, we looked at how to solve quadratic equations, factoring by graphing or using square roots. The first thing I want to do before we dive into 4.6, completing the square, I want to review how to use square roots really quick. Does anybody remember when is the, what'd you say? What is the conditions you are given to be able to use square roots, to use that method? You can only have something. What'd you say? Good. You can only have, hey, you can only have x squared or a squared, b squared, whatever. You only have a squared term. You will not have an x, an a, b, whatever. So in number 1, perfect. This problem is a good problem because it also reviews something else that I want to talk to you about. Okay, we have 3x squared minus 15. All quadratic equations, in order to solve them, needs to be set equal to what? 0. Why? Because you were trying to find where they cross the x-axis or where y is 0, or there's zeros or roots or solutions. So, okay, since this only has an x squared and you do not see an x as well, you can use square roots. Isolate x squared. What 2 steps will get x squared by itself? Okay, you can go through and divide by 3 first if you want to do that. You have to make sure if you're going to do that, that you divide everything in this entire equation by 3. And what's your other step? Add 5. And how do you undo an exponent of 2? You root it out. You take the square root. X equals what? What goes in front of that square root? 1. And what else? Positive and negative. Good. Don't forget square root, positive, negative. Don't forget square root, positive, negative, positive, negative, positive, negative. Y'all got that? Okay, another thing you could have done, you don't have to write this down, just want to show you really quick. You could have added 15 to both sides first, and then divided by 3, and then of course took the square root. So either way, you can go through and divide, or you can add and subtract first. You have some problems. They threw that in 4.6, so look out for that in Math Excel. That's problem with that, and it will tell you solve by using square roots. Okay, are y'all ready for this today? You don't have to write all of these examples down that you see in blue. I was just trying to show you a good variety that involve fractions, decimals, whole numbers, whatever, and plus and minus. So we're solving quadratic equations today by doing what's called completing the square. Have you guys ever heard of that before? Completing the square. Okay, maybe it sounds familiar. Maybe when we start doing some, it will be familiar to you. This method is applied when you have what's called perfect square trinomials. And what a perfect square trinomial is, you have, of course, a trinomial, like you see all on the left side, 3 terms. What's special about all of these numbers at the end? What did I say? Okay, you do have a decimal here. You've got a fraction here, 49. 4. Look, what's special about 4, 49, 9, 4, and let's just not include that decimal, and let's say 625. They're all perfect squares. If you say 0.25 squared, you're going to get that. So I know that we tend not to think of decimals or fractions as being perfect squares, but they are. Like I can square 0.5 and get 0.25 as a perfect square. So what we're going to be doing today, you're not going to be given this third term. They're going to give you the x squared plus 4x, and you're going to have to figure out what number goes in this spot in order to factor it into what you see on the right side. And we're going to talk about the process that you use to do that. So when you figure out the third number in a trinomial, perfect square trinomial, then you can factor it. This is called a perfect square. What do you think this is called? Perfect square what? How many terms are on the inside? 2. So it's a perfect square binomial. Sorry. I got something important my husband's trying to take care of today. So I'm checking. Okay, how do you think, I want you to notice, look at the sign in all 4 examples, and then look at the last number compared to that last number. Tell me what relationship 4 and 2, 49 and 7, 9 fourths, 3 halves, what relationship do they have? Good, they're the square root. Where do you think this sign inside comes from? Good. This sign will come from the middle term's sign. So if this is plus for the middle term, this is plus, minus middle, minus there. So how you actually factor a perfect square trinomial is you say, take the square root of your first term, of course, and it goes in front. Sign comes from the middle sign here, and you take the square root of that end number. Part of your homework is just going to simply have you complete the square and find this last term. And then part of your homework is going to ask you to go ahead and finish solving it. So we're going to look at both. Well, I kind of combined completing the square and solving because I didn't want to give you like 20 problems to do. Okay, so the next part, don't flip out when you see this because it's all in terms of variables. But I've got a step-by-step process written down on the next page for you, and I'll show you what to write down. Like you can really just write down this bottom equation if you want to. So like I was telling you above, if you know your x squared and your x terms, you can find that third number by doing what's called completing the square. And the way that you do that and don't write this down, but this is the first one that I did above. Well, second one. You don't have to write this down. You told me that the square root of 49 is what? 7. How does 7 relate to 14? It's half of it. Let me go back up really quick and I'll go back down because I know you guys are writing that down. All right, look at this. look, how do all these last numbers in the factored form relate to all of the middle numbers? 4 to 2 is half, 14 to 7 is half, 3 to 3 halves is half, 0.5, half of that is 0.25. So how you determine this third number is you actually are going to take half of this middle number and then do what to get this number? I take half of 14 and then I do what? You square it, which is why it's called completing the square. I take half of 4, which is 2, square it, and I get that third number. Half of 3, 3 halves, but when you square that, square both of those, you get 9 fourths. All right, let me go back down. So what it's saying here is that this middle term, how I use this middle term to get this third number is I take half of it and I square it. What will the sign of that number always be? What will this sign come out to be every time? Good. This, and notice up at the top, if you look back at the notes that you wrote down, all of those last numbers had a plus sign in front of them. +4, +49, +9 fourths. So your signs at the end in the non-factored form will always be plus. And down here, I'm just showing you what it looks like in variable form. You take half of this, square it, and that's your third term. And it factors, this would factor into x plus b over 2. Completing the square is not that hard. It's just something that we all tend to forget. You see it, you'll see it next year in pre-cal too. You'll use it again this year. Does anybody still need to stop? Okay. All right, you don't have to write all this down. I'm gonna try to shorten this for you. This is your process to follow. I'll circle really what you need to, or highlight for you, what you need to write down. Solving an equation by completing the square, you want to make sure that you rewrite your equation. It has to be in this form, like your terms with variables. All your variable stuff needs to be on one side. Terms of your variables need to be on one side, and your constants all need to be on the other side. So it needs to look like this. X squared needs to be positive, and it needs to have 1 in front of it. So x squared needs to be positive, and it needs to have a coefficient of 1. If not, you have to divide by a coefficient of x squared. So variables all on one side, like terms combined, which you shouldn't run into that much, but variables on one side, all numbers on the other side. Then divide through. If you have a number or a negative sign in front of x squared, you have to divide through by it. Okay, for the second part, you're going to take half of your x term and square it. And then you're going to add that to both sides. So add whatever you get when you take half of that middle term and you square it. You have to add that to both sides, because what you do to one side of an equation, you have to do to the other. And that is a tricky part to remember. I still find myself sometimes forgetting to add it to both sides and only adding it to one. Okay, so in step 3, once you get to that point, then you should have a perfect square trinomial that will factor. So then you're going to factor it into this form. So factor it into that perfect square trinomial form. I should say x plus or minus because that sign's going to depend on whatever your sign in the middle is. Does anybody still need 1? Can I move up? Okay, finally, the last, or steps 4 and 5, you should be able to take the square root of both sides. Square root and then solve. Okay, can I move up? Does anyone need 3, 4, and 5? I'm sorry, what did you say? Okay. I'm so sorry. I know that's hard to hear me too through this mouse. What did I think? What somebody just asked me? Oh, okay. Yeah, go ahead. Thank you. Okay. All right. Let's try one out. Number 1, you have x squared minus 30x. So here's my middle term, x term. Then you have plus 225 equals 400. Your first step said to make sure that all of your variables are on one side together and all of your constants or numbers on the other side. So what do we need to do with 225? You need to subtract it first. So that's going to give us x squared minus 30x on the left side equals 175 on the right side. Okay, so step one, okay, another thing in step 1, you needed to make sure that x squared is positive and it doesn't have a coefficient other than 1. So we're good. We got positive 1 in front, good to go. So then we move on to step 2. It says you take half of this x term. So I got 30 divided by 2 is 15. And then what do I do with that? You square it, and that will give you 225. And then you do what to both sides? Not yet. You're close. Good. You're going to add that number. You don't have to rewrite that equation. I should have actually left some room. If you'll get in the habit of, once you get it to this point, just leave a space here and leave a space. Well, there is a space there, but anyway. So make sure that you add 225 to both sides. Okay, now the third step, I should have a perfect square trinomial if I follow these steps right, and we do. So then we're going to factor it into that binomial squared, and I have x minus what? This sign comes from the sign in front of your middle term, and then you just take this. What was half of that? Good. Or you can think about it like this. You're really, to get this, you're taking the square root of the first term and the square root of that last term. And the sign comes from the middle. And I'll set that equal to 400. Okay, so we did step 3. We factored it. Step 4. Now I should be able to take the square root of both sides, and I am. I have something squared equals 400 to get rid of that exponent of 2, so I can solve for x, take the square roots.
Why do you add 2.5?
Because it's like if I'm, for example, like if I have this equation, x minus 5 equals 2, then you know, of course, you need to add 5 to this side to get x by itself. But you have to add 5 to this side to make sure it's balanced, right? To keep it equal. So that's a similar thing. Here, this is what I had. If all of a sudden I add 225 to the left side, well, to keep it balanced, I have to do the same thing to the right side. Anything in an equation that you do to one side, you have to do to the other. So that's why. Okay, from this point, you're going to be left with just x minus 15. That squared goes away. What do you have here? Tell me what you need to write before you write your number. Good, plus and minus. And square root of 400 is 20. Okay, this is how you get your two answers from this point. One of your equations is x minus 15 equals 20. And the other one is what? Good, so x minus 15. What will x be in this case?
35.
Okay, 35. And then you have x minus 15 equals negative 20. And so x equals what? All right. I know you guys are not a fan of this method, are you? If you will be, or if you are able to pick up on perfect square trinomials, which of course, if you applied the factoring method like that we did in 4.4 and 4.5, you would find that this will factor in x minus 15, x minus 15, which you can write like that. But anyway, you'll see perfect square binomials and trinomials a lot throughout pre-cal, calculus, algebra 2. All right, you ready to amp it up some? Number 2. Okay, we're going to solve and we're going to leave any answers in radical form. Meaning if we take the square root and we can't get a whole number, then we're going to simplify as much as possible. Okay, in this problem, tell me From step one, you need to make sure all variables are on one side, all numbers are on one side. So what's the first thing you need to do? What'd you say? Good. Subtract 1. And this is what you're left with. 25x squared plus 10x equals 8. The other part of step 1 was to make sure that x squared has 1 in front of it. So you need to go through and divide by what? 25. And we have your favorite thing left in this problem, which is fractions. Yeah. So that gives us x squared. Let's go ahead and reduce 10/25 to 2/5 x. Leave some space so that we can complete the square. And 8/25 will not reduce. Everybody okay so far? Okay, now to complete the square, you take half of your middle term. How do you take half of 2/5? You're close. You multiply it by what? You multiply it by 1/2. If you're taking half of something, remember of in math means multiply. So that's all you do is multiply it by 1/2. Because a lot of people do think, oh, I divide by 2, which you do, but you're really multiplying by 1/2. So that's going to give you, when you multiply straight across, 2/10, which reduces to what? 1/5. One final thing to do with that number is to square it. We took half of it, now we have to square it. Good. When you square a fraction, just simply square the top number, square the bottom. Whew, now we add 1/25. If I add it to the left side, where else do you have to add it? Good, I have to add it to the right side. Luckily for us, they at least have a common denominator. I don't think I didn't leave myself enough room. Okay, so all right, we just did step 2. So step 3, we have to factor this. So factor your perfect square trinomial that you have. And then we'll combine like terms on the right side. Tell me what that will factor into. Good, x, and then you get the plus sign from that middle term. And then I simply just take the square root. I mean, pretty much this is your B2, whatever this number is after you take half of it, that's what you goes here. I can't talk. Anyway, so just take the square root of that, which is 1/5. Equals what? Good. When you combine like terms here. Okay, whew, finally, step 4 and 5. We do what? Square roots. what will you be left with on the left side?
X plus 1/5.
Good, x plus 1/5. Please make sure you do not bring down the parentheses and the squared. You're left with x plus 1/5. And on the right side, you have what?
3/5.
Good. Yeah, so that means- You got 3/5 and what in front of it? Square root plus minus, 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 square root plus minus. I say that only because I've forgotten it like 1,000 times in my life. So one of your answers is x plus 1/5 equals 3/5 when you solve. X plus 1/5 equals negative 3/5. When you subtract 1/5 from 3/5, one of your solutions is 2/5. When we subtract 1/5 from negative 3/5, negative 4/5. Okay, the only reason I'm doing one more with you is because, well, for two reasons. Make sure you understand it, but this answer comes out to have radicals in it. I thought the last one was going to. I forgot it's this problem. You'll have square roots left in your problem. Okay, so the first thing is make sure that all of your variables are on one side. All numbers are on the other side. What do you need to do with x squared? Good. I'm going to subtract it from both sides. And notice that it has a like term on the left side. So line those up. And then what can you do with this minus 5? Good. I'm going to add 5, and I'm going to do that all at the same time. That will go away here. Your x squared cancel in that area. So we have x squared plus 2x equals 5. Okay, when you take half of this number and square it, what do you get? You get, when you take half of this, sorry, the 2, when you take half of that and square it, you get 1. So you add 1 to both sides. And this will factor, take the square root of x squared. This sign is the same, so this is a plus sign. And then, of course, square root of 1 is 1. So you got x plus 1 squared equals 6. Okay, finally, we've factored, we've completed the square. So last 2 steps, take the square root and solve for x. This will leave you with just x plus 1, and you have positive or negative root 6 And you can't simplify square root of 6. It's not a perfect square, plus it will not break down. So when you subtract 1 from both sides, you have -1 plus or minus the square root of 6. Those are your two answers. Lovely Math Excel is going to make you split them up and type them in separated. I don't know why they do that, but they do. So you're going to have to type these answers in as -1 plus root 6, comma, -1 minus root 6. And if you get this and type it in like that, for some reason they're going to count you wrong. I don't know why. Okay, do y'all have any questions about solving by completing the square? Okay, this is the last part of your notes. You don't have to write this down. You don't have to write any of it down if you don't want to. I'm going to post these notes in just a second. These problems look intimidating and they look difficult, but it's actually really easy how you find K. So if you want to just chill for a minute and just listen to me, and then I'll post. Find the value of K that would make the left side a perfect square trinomial. So I want you guys to figure out, how did we get this last number? How have we been getting this last number? We've done what with that middle? Good, we cut it in half and then squared it. So if I work backwards, what's the square root of this? 11. And then I took half of some number though to get 11. So when you work backwards, remember we divided by 2 then squared. So we're going to square root and then do what? Multiply by 2. So you're undoing everything that you just did. Like, so square root of 121 equals 11, and then you're going to multiply that by 2. So K is 22. Okay, I want to show you one like B because, of course, we have something in front of x squared, so it works a little bit different than A. If you were to factor this, you would have the square root of the first, so you'd have 3x in the front. This would be a plus sign. And then what number would go here? It's always square root first, square root last. So 2, wait, you got it. I know what you said. Yes, double that. And you got it. Okay, I'll show. Look, you actually get this middle term. I'm gonna show you the same way in A. Just look real quick. If I take the square root of that, and then remember the sign in the middle comes from that middle, and then remember the number at the end was always the square root of that number. What did we get for K? What can you do with this number? How do those two relate? And what was in front of X? So if you say 1 times 11 and then doubled it, you get 22. Okay, what if I multiply 3 and 2 together? What do you get? Of course, double it. K is 12. And that will always work. If I have this binomial squared, 2x minus 5 squared, and I want to find my middle term without doing any work, then I'm going to multiply 2 and 5 and double it. I'm going to take this sign, like I'm going to multiply -2 and 5. And if you do that and double it, what do you get? -20. So -20 would be your middle term coefficient. You can, that's actually a way, and I'm kind of telling you too much, but instead of doing the FOIL method, writing this out one more time, if that's what we were doing, you could actually just square this first term. So like here, I could just square 3x and get 9x squared. I could square this last term and get that last term, and I could multiply everything inside and double it to get 12x. So anyway, that's for another day. All right, y'all had enough for today. Work on your Math Excel. If you want to turn in that paper assignment from last time, you can, or you can submit it online, either way. I did finally post answers to your 4 or 5 yesterday, I believe. Yes.